We're getting reports that there have been protests outside the Chinese embassy. Tibetan protesters converged outside the embassy and were detained later by the Delhi police. Several protesters were rounded up. Atir Khan is now joining us with more details. Atir, it seems to have become a regular feature. Once in a while, Tibetan protesters converging outside the Chinese embassy, and we see the same pattern with the police removing them.
Well, that's right. You know, there were reports that they could carry out protests outside Chinese embassy on the occasion of Tibetan Uprising Day. You know, what happened was that they gathered in small numbers, and all of a sudden the numbers grew. So therefore, the police from Chanakyapuri was rushed to the spot, and those protesters have been rounded up and they have been brought to Chanakyapuri Police Station in preventive custody.
And has the entire area been cleared now, Atir?
Well, that's right. It's a VVIP area, so the police doesn't allow you know, any gathering or crowds to gather outside. In this diplomatic area, the protesters have been rounded up and they have been brought to Chanakyapuri Police Station.
And Atir, when will the protesters be allowed to go from the Chanakyapuri Police Station? Have they been detained till evening, or will they be allowed to go earlier in the day?
Well, it depends on the discretion of the investigating officer, the officers who have detained them. It seems it will take a while before they are released. Yes, you're right. Until evening, it seems they won't be released before evening, and they will be kept in custody till then.
Atir, does it appear that this time around the protests outside the Chinese embassy were much larger than what we've seen in the past?
Well, yes, these people had gathered in small numbers and they came from different directions. So it took a while for the forces, though there is permanent deployment of police force outside both Chinese and US embassy. But then since the numbers were you know, greater, then the police had to call in reinforcements from Chanakyapuri Police Station to round them up and take them to for custody.
And clearly, Atir, through the visuals, we can see very aggressive protesters this time around, something that one would not really equate to Tibetan protesters. They are usually quieter, although demonstrating usually outside Chinese embassy at occasions like these. There also seem to be a lot of women protesters this time around.
Well, that's right. Since the occasion is Tibetan Uprising Day, there is anger and angst amongst them. But then we have seen that in the past there have been violent protests also carried out by their colleagues and co-activists, not in Delhi but other places. They have gone to the extent of self-immolation. But here, you know, the situation was controlled in time and they were rounded up and taken to the police station.
Also, Atir, it becomes a very tricky situation for India because every time there is any sort of talk with the Chinese side, the Tibetans want their issue to be raised as well, which usually does not find mention because of the issue being very sensitive. But how have you in the past seen these protests becoming bigger and bigger, especially in India?
Well, every time there is a visit of Chinese premier, we see protests like this. But today it was carried out on the occasion of Tibetan Uprising Day. Yes, you're right. Whenever this happens, there's a tightrope which the government has to do, since they have been given refuge in India. And, you know, but at the same time, the demands are rising and they expect that India should take up all their issues, which is practically not possible. However, from time to time, they're given assurance and they're given a refuge in India.
Atir, do stay on with us. We'll also be joined by Deputy Editor Smita Sharma, but let's quickly listen in to some of the protesters there who are trying to speak to the media.
It is the time now. 150 people have died. We have self-immolated, please. Shit now. We have country. We want us. We need justice. We need justice. We need justice. We want
Let me now go across to Smita Sharma. Smita, this time the protest seems to be even more aggressive than what we've seen in the past. Any particular reason for that, if you could help us understand?
Well, Maha, this is really the 54th anniversary of the Tibetan uprising of 1969. Remember when thousands of Tibetans had taken to streets to protest against what they called were illegal Chinese invasions and occupations. Something, of course, which the claims the Chinese have always, the authorities have always denied and dealt with a strong iron hand. And, as far as India is concerned, well, as Asir was pointing out, we normally see these protests around the time that the Chinese premier is coming to town. But remember, India has been, of course, engaging at a very high level with the Chinese. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also heading to China himself this May. Having said that, also, for China, it is not just about perceiving how the Tibetans are given a political space in India. It's about essentially what sort of presence they find on the global stage, really. Remember, when the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was in the US recently, China had sort of raised those flags saying that there should not be a one-on-one meeting between the US President Barack Obama and Dalai Lama. Objections that they have, of course, raised in the past as well. So clearly, this is a much younger lot, a younger generation of Tibetans, refugees in India. And, it's the age of social networking where it becomes easier to spread across the world. That's why perhaps we see these numbers blowing up now.
Smita, do stay on with us. Let's quickly listen into some more protesters and then we'll come back to you.
Hello.
Smita, I'm coming back to you. Smita, how is this issue of the Tibetans handled by India and China diplomatically, considering it's such a sensitive one?
Maha, it is in fact one of the biggest sticking points in the relationship, really. You have that boundary issue that continues to, of course, linger on between India and China, despite China having settled most of its boundaries with other neighbors. And also this issue of Tibetans. Now remember, India has always said that the Tibetan refugees here and, of course, Holiness the Dalai Lama, that they do not partake of in political activities, that these are only peaceful bodies that are allowed refuge here, asylum here under international norms. Having said that, there is, of course, that parliament in exile of Tibetans in Dharamshala, really. And, for the Chinese, this has been a bone of contention which they have been raising. But it's not just in India that we see these Tibetans protests, Maha, really. Just 2 days back, in fact, in Taipei too, we saw a lot of these Tibetans in exile waving out the flags, the snow flags, as we see them, the snow lion flags, which are really the symbols of the Tibetans, waving of those flags, marching across the streets of Taipei with those similar slogans of "We want freedom," something that we have heard time and again. Every time we have had a high-level Chinese delegation coming in those meetings in Hyderabad House, as well as and when they take place. So, different countries respond to them in different ways. Germany, in fact, is attending some of these ceremonies themselves. Prague says that we will not take down the Tibetan flag, on 10th of March, which is the annual uprising day. So it definitely remains a bone of contention, and I can tell you that right now in front of, in fact, this Chinese embassy, there are police forces that are still trying to, in fact, fill in those buses with these protesters, dragging them and trying to ensure that they can be taken into detention. Maha.
Smita, you were mentioning social networking. Has that given Tibetans a stronger voice, perhaps? Is that the reason that we see the protests in India especially going from strength to strength with each passing year?
Absolutely, Maha. Really social networking in a way has changed the revolution, if I can say, the movements across the world. We saw social networks play such an important role during the Arab uprising just a few years back. And similarly in China, remember when the Olympic torch was being carried the year that China was hosting the Olympics. In fact, we saw Tibetans really take to social networking platforms, flash out those videos, even despite all attempts of being silenced out of press by the state, by the administrations. But there are so many ways now to find a way out to put your voice on that global platform. If you ban Twitter in China, you still have that microblogging site, Weibo. You still have other ways to figure out, how to really get your views out. So clearly, we can see that these messages, in fact, on Facebook pages, on Twitter here in India, that have been ringed around for the last few days, asking, of course, young protesters.
Okay.
Most of them who were born much later than that 1959 uprising. Really, it's a much younger generation, but they are connected, of course, on the internet in a platform that allows them to perhaps group in a much easier way.
Smita Sharma, thanks for joining us with those details. Smita and Atir getting us details about the Tibetan protest outside the Chinese embassy, which has now been broken up by the Delhi police. So all of them have been rounded up and been taken to the Chanakyapuri Police Station.